would say, well, have people on the left ever been violent in protesting? Were they prosecuted for that? Were they left in DC Central for months or years?
Completely aflame.
While all of this was happening, policemen were told to have a light touch.
Are they being treated equally?
I've stated multiple times that if laws were broken, then people that broke those laws need to be held accountable. But there shouldn't be, we're going to have one standard for January 6th people who walked into the Capitol, and we're going to have another standard for those liberal environmentalist activists who stormed the Department of Interior. I held up a picture in a Judiciary Committee hearing and asked A.G. Garland that specific question. Here's a picture of January 6th. Here's a picture of leftist environmentalists storming into the Department of Interior. Officers were injured. Officers had to go to the hospital. You've heard nothing about that on mainstream media. And I said, are you going to treat these two cases the same? He refused to answer my question. Said he hadn't even heard of or knew that the Department of Interior had been raided. Federal building. Would you call both of these acts domestic terrorism?
Look, I'm not going to comment about particular matters.
As we sit here today, we all know what's happening with the January 6th people. But nothing has happened to any of these individuals after asking repeatedly to this DOJ.
We have a two-tiered justice system, and there are some people who are, in fact, above the law. I've read Hunter Biden's laptop, and I don't understand why we're prosecuting Donald Trump, but nobody's prosecuting Hunter Biden. This makes no sense to me.
We all know that words have power.
Other criminal investigations facing the former president.
Breaking news, President Trump in a phone call pushing the Georgia Secretary of State to find votes.
Georgia, prosecutors are still trying to prove that Mr. Trump made a request to falsify election results. Then there is the case that resulted in the FBI Mar-a-Lago raid last summer, which has been made more complex for the federal agency because now President Biden also reportedly removed national security-related documents. As for the January 6th investigation, charges against Trump would probably require the prosecutors to prove he wanted to obstruct the presidential certification.
I know how you feel, but go home and go home in peace. The indictment is a symptom of a much greater problem. The symptoms are indictments of Trump, FBI raiding members of the intelligence community, big members. I mean, big name people coming out and basically saying, yeah, we intentionally signed a letter that wasn't true. Those are more symptoms. The problem that is facing this indictment, a big piece of this, is corruption, is deep-seated corruption.
The news cycle often feels like it moves at the speed of light. But as we reflect on much of what has taken place since 2016, the groundless Russia collusion investigation, 2 impeachment attempts, and now high-ranking officials orchestrating a letter suggesting the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation, it raises more questions. What's happened in our beloved country?
With an election on the horizon, inflation out of control, and China's constant provocation, is this really what voters want our elected officials to focus on?
Well, we're not a serious country anymore when you think about it. This is all bread and circuses for the masses. We have serious problems. Think about our foreign policy problems. Think about our military weakness. Think about the border crisis. Humanitarian crisis. You feel strongly about the immigrants to this country that should be taken care of. That's a strain on our budget. But we're not a serious country when all we're talking about here is indicting Trump. It's the mark of really, I hate to say it, but a dissolute nation that has lost its bearings. It's very unprincipled.
Uncle Sam's misguided children.
These individuals do a great job by letting people, like let's say a knife point robbery. He thinks that's a minor offense. Low-level burglaries, he calls them. If somebody breaks into your house, is that a low-level crime? Commercial burglaries are through the roof here. Stores now, our drug chains are locking everything up constantly because of the theft. It's just unbelievable. You know, now we're trying to get back to sanity in New York City, but it's a tough road when you're going to have DAs like Alvin Bragg kind of letting it, you know, resisting arrest, he even says he's not going to prosecute. Can you believe that?
City police are searching for
Robberies in Manhattan.
Police are robbers deliberately crashing into an SUV.
Right now, we may have set on a path of convicting people using an ambiguous interpretation of legal statute to achieve political goals.
That they have started to go down a very, very dangerous road.
But how far are we from the cautionary tales history has left us to reflect upon? What will happen when we can't hold ourselves up to the standards of the rule of law?
Stalin, who was one of the worst genocidal maniacs in history, up to 20 million people killed under his reign, he takes somebody who's him, and rather than really just taking them out back and shooting them, they would invent charges against somebody and convict them of that, and then unfortunately oftentimes followed by quick sentences, often of execution. And you see the same thing in Maoist China. You see the same thing in any number of banana republics, Cuba, Central America. It's a common refrain where whatever side is in power decides that they are going to discredit or maybe even eliminate their political opponents through law enforcement and through the judiciary. And we're in the early stages of that happening right now. But we see many, many occasions right now where federal law enforcement targeting people based on politics. It's an extremely dangerous time.
Jesse, is there a specific point in our history, modern or otherwise, that you kind of feel as though we started to diverge from those ideals?
Oh, it's really interesting to talk about this. How we kind of began the process of losing our constitutional republic given by our founders. And history probably at everything from the reforms that were put in place after the Civil War that were very heavy-handed. They can look at security measures that came in place during the Cold War. They can certainly look. And where I would peg it in modern times is our fear of terrorism after 9/11 and the rise of bills like the Patriot Act. I remember a new government agency that was going to come in place after September 11th, and it was to be called the Department of Homeland Security. And I just kind of shrugged a little bit, and my hair stood on end because, gosh, that sounds a lot like the Committee for State Security. And the Committee for State Security in Russian is KGB. Then you kind of look at the Patriot Act and you look at some of these other statutes that were passed, and you go, right now they're thinking about using this against our enemies overseas. And we certainly do need to protect our citizens when called upon. There's no doubt about that. But what's to stop this from being used against Americans? And the answer, we know now. The answer is nothing. The answer is, we just have to trust our federal law enforcement. They've proven themselves unworthy of trust.
Civil society has dramatically changed since our founders drafted the Constitution, both for the good and the bad. Many of the founders were spiritual believers who believed in unchanging moral principles as a basis for human conduct. There seems to have been a forced schism between spirituality and government. Does hope for our country ultimately lie into tradition? Are you hopeful at all, or what will it take to get the country's legal system back on track? Is there hope?
Well, Steve, I wish I could tell you that there's an easy fix. because a lot of these problems are downstream of far upstream problems. You know, one problem is the culture has changed. You know, I think that if you talk to ordinary Americans in, say, 1941, you know, at a time when Hollywood was very patriotic and where movies would be put out teaching people about the Constitution and about not just their civic, you know, civil rights, but also their civic duties, that a lot of that has gone by the board. And we've also seen a change in the media where we see, you know, social media rising and people constantly yelling at each other and, you know, a debasement of analysis, reflection.
There was a time in America when both parties were patriotic, both parties were anti-communist. Democrats wanted to tax a little more and spend a little more. Republicans, at least theoretically, wanted to tax less and spend yet less. But your efforts were to win a general election, not to put the opposition in jail or ruin them financially or destroy them.
I was formerly a registered Democrat. So our family, my entire family, I had 9 brothers and sisters, and of course my mother and father, we consider ourselves Kennedy Democrats. So JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King. When I was a kid, and I was a young man, we looked at Republicans as the party of the elites, party of wealth, right? The party of the haves, right? When we were looking at ourselves as the party of the workers and the have-nots. But I think Kennedy saw what happened, or what was happening to the Democratic Party. One of them being an overreaching federal government, and the ideals, the true ideals of the Democratic Party. And because he tried to raise those ideals, he was killed for it. Okay, he was assassinated for it. Physical assassinations are much messier these days. And we have a lot of new technologies to be able to learn, you know, the forensics of something that happened, right? Where what is less messy is the assassination by narrative, okay? I'm a product of one of those. I've been assassinated by narrative, yet I'm still standing because I have a much deeper understanding of what it is that we're facing than you know, 95% of just regular people. The tailspin is going to drive us right into the ground, and that's going to be the end of America, and that will be America's demise.